It's the 1980s. Millions of viewers are tuning into Top of the Pops each week. And indeed, pop was back, with all its fantasy, image and glamour. Anarchy has been crushed, and the major record labels are back in town, with video as their weapon of choice. Creating stars overnight, there's money to be made by the chosen few. This is a story of creativity, power and intrigue, set within the hallowed halls of 80s pop. Sade and Paul Anthony Cook, Just a Drummer, Part 2. When a band has worked together for years and they suddenly hit the big time, some members of that band get left behind. Sometimes for good reason, and sometimes it's a little more interesting. I'm Douglas Pye, and this is the story of Paul Anthony Cook, who got treated as just a drummer. In this series, I'm talking to Paul, who is the former drummer with the band Sade, and a friend whom I'd lost contact with for nearly 35 years. And here we catch up with Paul as the band Sade begins its ascendancy. And Paul has a bit of a bizarre meeting with band manager Lee Barrett.
We felt with the band that we were getting a really good sound together, and we were really happy with everything we produced.
And where better place to start Part 2 than Wardour Street in Soho? Or as it's known in the film industry, the Street of Dreams. And it's here in the 1980s sat the legendary Wag Club. I always wanted to go to the Wag Club and even had the turtleneck jumper for it. But I never made it. And it's now part of a pub chain, but back then... Well, let's hear from Paul.
Yeah, I mean, this was the time to be at the Wag Club. I mean, irrespective of where it is now, at that time, it was the place to be seen. You'd be mixing with people in TV celebrities like Robert Elms and Spandau Ballet. George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley would be, working on the routines before they went on Top of the Pops with Wham. And, I think Sade herself was very good at making connections in this scene, and she got to know all the right people at the right time. She was getting into all the magazines like ID, Vogue and The Face, and obviously she had her fashion connections, and she was working those as best she could, to get out there. I mean, she was certainly working it. And her boyfriend was a man about town and celebrity, Robert Elms, so it was a no-brainer. She was making all the right moves in all the right places.
As the band Sade started to take off in the underground scene, what reactions were you getting?
Well, we played all the best clubs in London. I mean, we were literally going round them more than once. So people were getting very used to us. And I was in a band that was getting some serious media attention, which was great to see. All the gigs were sold out. And then in early 83, as a band, we got to record demos at EMI Publishing in their own studios, which was brilliant as a young band to get to do a proper recording in a real studio. And we recorded some of the Pride songs, one called Diamond Life, one called Should I Love You, both originally wrote by Ray St. John in Pride. And this all felt like, we were getting somewhere, and it was just an exciting time for everybody. And I just loved everything that was going on. We just had this innovative and exciting sound that people loved, along with a lead singer who just looked really good.
What were some of your best memories or standout moments from this time?
I think for me, it has to be the performance at the Town Theatre in New York with Sade. I think the last time we played that club was one of the best shows I've ever played with a band. I mean, just the drum sound alone was incredible for me, as was the audience who just loved us to death. But I think my overall landmark performance we ever gave as Sade, the original band, was at the BBC studios to record a live session for DJ Peter Powell. We played the cover Crimea River, and it was just a very jazzy, very simple but carefully crafted dynamic that just sent chills for everyone in the studio. I remember, and I think to play live on such a stage, and at such a big radio broadcast, and come up with such magic together as a band. This is what it's all about. And as a band, what PSP produced was magic.
And so, with this newfound attention for the band Sade, what happened next?
Jack Stevens, the A&R for RCA, he organised and paid for us to, well, he got RCA to pay for us to record at Power Plant Studios, and he introduced the band, well, the singer first, to the producer Robin Miller. And Stuart had decamped to Sade's flat, and he started stamping his mark on the music along with Robin Miller.
That must have been really exciting to actually get the chance to go into a studio to record all the tracks you'd worked on.
Yeah, it was great to think. I mean, we were actually heading into the studio it wasn't just a demo for a publisher, it was our, studio recording session paid for by a record company with a chance we could be potentially signed to it. What more could you ask for?
So I believe you went into the studio on the 1st of October 1983. What was actually recorded and when?
In the first week, we put everything down to a click track, and then I tightened all my drums up, that I'd put down, and made sure everything was sounding really good. And then in the second week, everyone came along and updated their parts, because we were in a multi-track situation, and everybody could do that. We could go over things and get things better. And then in the third week, we started to rough mix everything we'd done, and we all got little cassettes from the producers of what we'd done, ready for what I thought was a final mix in a final mix session in the fourth week. We put down Smooth Operator, Your Love Is King, and Hang On To Your Love, which were totally finished in these first sessions. And I thought the fourth week was for the final mixing, and I kind of took a back seat on that. I needed a break, and my family were coming down to Hastings, and in the fourth week I went to join them on holiday.
Once in the studio, who was making the creative choices and what was your role in this?
Well, I mean, obviously the producer, Robin Miller, was very prominent. The first time the band had ever worked in that respect. Stuart had developed a very close relationship with him, and they both started to shape the recordings as they saw fit, along with Sade.
How did this manifest itself?
Robin Miller started going back over our recorded songs like Sally, um, and I would be sat in the studio in the drum booth, and he would play me Sally and ask me to play it in a different way. I did play the drums, maybe the hi-hat, in a different tempo, in a different time signature, and I just thought it was really odd. And it kind of went against everything we'd done. I thought we'd got everything down in the first few weeks, and that my drums had been, put to tape. So it was a very confusing time. It was a time where I started disagreeing with Robin, and then that went over to other members of the band, especially Stuart, because it was clear they wanted different things to happen on the drums that I wasn't happy with. And I started to feel the collaborative aspects of what we'd done, especially with the PSP sound and early Sade, was being taken away and eroded and removed by the production. And also Stuart at that time just started working with electronics, and he wanted electronic signatures on the bass drum, and some of the songs which totally went against everything that we'd ever produced and developed. And I thought, oh my God, here we go, back to the drum machine again. So, when he started wanting me to play bass drum parts the same as a drum machine, which I could never do because I was a natural sort of live field drummer and not a machine. I disagreed with where the drum was going. I wanted to play the track my way. I wasn't happy with the sections that kept being recorded and looped. It just didn't feel natural to me. So, I just naturally objected to the changes brought by Matthew and Miller, and I just wouldn't cooperate to the demands of the producer. And then he kind of fed that back to the band. They might have seen me objecting to that, with him live when I was going over things. And he said they could do better and that they should get rid of me.
Do you think things perhaps would have worked out differently if there'd been a different producer?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I've been working with music now for 40 years, and I've produced bands and I've produced music in my own right for that amount of time since then. And if I was producing a young band of 21-year-olds with a natural sound of their own, I wouldn't expect them to be able to ape, seasoned session musicians or established musicians that had been playing for 10 to 20 years. It just doesn't work that way. And I think that is what I would have wanted from a producer, is someone who would have said, well, okay, Paul's 21, he's never worked in a studio with a producer before. um, I won't put these demands on him at this stage in his career. And if the band want to be true to their original sound, then I would just back off a bit and let them produce what they want to produce, and then develop, maybe in album 3 or 4, they're going to come up to a different standard with the musicianship. You can't do it in your first album. So this is the difference between being a band drummer and working as a session drummer. It's a totally different discipline, and it's a different craft. And it's something that I'd never been prepared for, wanted to be. If you're going to ask an inexperienced drummer, especially an inexperienced studio drummer, to perform like a session drummer in the studio and direct him like one, he's just asking too much. It's ridiculous. I mean, I think if we had met a more hands-off producer, it would have been better for me and better for the band. I still think there might have been friction between myself and Stuart, because he was also always pushing a lot of the production changes through, and I would never play anything he wanted. In fact, I used to tell him to get stuffed if he asked. I mean, I would, like the time he said, "Can you play a Smooth Operator with a straight bossa nova beat?" And I like my version of the bossa nova better. It suited the song, and it went with Paul's bass line better. And to me, they were changing everything we had developed as a band, and I really wasn't happy with it.
Did you feel almost surplus to requirement if your parts could be created by a drum machine?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that. I mean, they had two choices. If you want a drum machine sound, use a drum machine. If you want a session drummer, get one in. Don't ask me to do it. I was the band drummer and I had my own beats and ideas. I didn't enter that studio as a paid session drummer and who could just play whatever was required. That wasn't my remit. A band drummer is a band drummer. I had a unique approach to what I'd played in the band. And later on, in fact, they did bring in a session drummer at that time. I mean, Cherry Pie became something completely different using a session drummer. But luckily, Smooth Operator, the big hit, was a straight ahead record from that time of my drumming in the band Sade, and they can't take that away from me. It's set in stone from early October 1983.
Tell me more about Smooth Operator. This seems to be the key song in Sade's history.
Yeah, I mean, this song was picked up by AMI Publishing in mid '83. We did that demo for them. Um, and it was always the song that everybody loved the most, when we played live. I mean, combined with Snake by, which was a PSP instrumental that we put onto the end of it. You know, people went crazy for it in the clubs. In fact, Smooth Operator and Your Love Is King had been the first songs we recorded with the producer in October 1983, and they remained unchanged from that moment on and never touched. And then, obviously, Sade released them on her album in '84. So at the end of the day, I got to perform on a hit song that was in the top 10 in the UK and the USA, which was fine by me.
And whilst we're talking about Smooth Operator, in 1984, a video buyout form was produced for the second recorded version of Smooth Operator with session drummer Dave Earley, which was signed off by the Musicians' Union, allowing Dave Earley to perform on Top of the Pops as the Sade drummer, and also to be seen performing on the Sade video for Smooth Operator. However, Dave Earley wasn't available for the video date, but luckily, John Rose was available. If you remember, this was Stuart's mate who wasn't just a drummer, he wasn't even a drummer, which at the time meant John became more famous for being the drummer of Sade than Paul. And this is where we introduced the solicitor Brian Carr. Unbeknown to you, I believe, Sade had been advised by him to set up companies to control the money paid by RCA for these recordings. I believe this was in August 1983, before the recording sessions. Were you aware of this?
No, I had no clue about this at all.
So do you know in hindsight who was aware of this?
I believe certain people in the band were aware that a deal had been struck. I believe only Sade, Jack Stephen, Robin Miller, and Stewart were in on it initially, and of course Lee Barrett, the manager.
Did you think that RCA were paying directly for the recording time, or was it something you just didn't even question?
Yeah, exactly that. I was just the drummer. I mean, I met Jack Stevens briefly at the studios in Power Plant, and he was very happy. He came up to me and he said, "How's everything going? Is it going all right?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah. What do you think?" And he said, "Yeah, I like what I sound, what I'm hearing." And I thought he was from our MCA at the time. I didn't even know it was RCA until much later, and that they were paying. That's how much I was kept in the dark.
And after the tracks were finished, RCA decided not to sign up Sade, as the MD of RCA wanted to concentrate on their excellent and very successful band, the Eurythmics, which is understandable, but I do reckon he might have regretted this in hindsight. But as they say, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So, Paul, what happened next?
Well, I think, that time Sade had to quickly tout the masters to the record companies with manager Lee Barrett. I mean, and she finally signed her own solo deal on the 19th of October 1983 with CBS Records, now known as Sony Music UK, and formerly Epic Records, for the main songs, Smooth Operator, Your Love Is King, and Hang On To Your Love.
So she made out she had ownership of all the tracks?
Yeah, I mean, she claimed the grant of rights at 100% in that contract and signed it off as such as all under her ownership.
So am I correct in saying that you all as a band recorded all the tracks starting on the 1st of October, and by the 19th of October, Sade, the singer, not the band, had got herself a solo deal on the back of these tracks and your collective efforts?
Yeah, that's the one.
If nothing else, that's some very fast manoeuvres on her part. When did you get told about this?
Yeah, I mean, she worked it well. I mean, she told me in the band recreation area at Power Plant Studios after I returned from my family holiday.
And what was your reaction to the solo deal?
Yeah, I mean, I totally disagreed, obviously, and vehemently opposed her, signing this contract. And I think she mentions this in one of her biographies, in that I was the only person ever, to tell her to get lost in that respect.
And was this just about the contract, or was there any sort of personal clash?
Um, I think at the time it was about her solo contract, as I thought I was really going to be signed as within the band Sade. and get a record deal, for the band, and we were going to go forward as a band. It was nothing personal. I just felt betrayed. I mean, I was just hoping to go forward as Sade in my original band, Sade.
But what about the rights to the recordings?
Well, Sade more or less said to CBS Records at the time that she had all rights to those recordings.
And had anyone else agreed to give Sade the rights?
The original RCA masters should have rightly, they should have rightly been owned jointly by PSP and Sade. I don't think they were the singers to own. I mean, RCA had paid for the band to go in with Robin Miller, not necessarily her on her own. So I can only assume there was an agreement with Paul Denman and Stewart to give Sade their rights. I mean, I was completely overlooked after my objections, and I guess at that point, all concerned were thinking of a way to get rid of me.
And again, no one discussed this with you or checked in with you about it?
No, not at all.
So you were left totally in the dark, as if you were not even part of the creative process?
Yeah, that's true.
As if you were only a session drummer and not part of the band PSP or indeed Sade? Were you at this point concerned that something was going on about you being kept in the band?
Yeah, I mean, I always had a feeling at that time that something was going on. Obviously, I mean, I became aware that certain members wanted to get rid of me. I think Stuart said to me in the studios, "Oh, well, if you don't respect, me and Sade, you can get lost." So I mean, I was getting a lot of flack. Obviously, I was getting a real lot of that from the producer who advocated to get rid of me. So, and I think at the end of the day, the most obvious thing was to blame it on my drumming ability, and they just built on that negative reporting from the producer to do just that.
Did you not chat with Paul Denman about any of this? I mean, especially considering you and him had now been playing together for some years.
No, we, funnily enough, never discussed it. I mean, Paul just went dark on me at the time, and but funnily enough, I did notice changes that he was best mates with Andrew Hale, who was the new member of the band, and they were both living in a really nice flat. So, the penny just didn't drop at the time.
And what were you thinking that your position in the band was?
Well, after the studio sessions, I just had a feeling I was on my way out. I mean, we did a gig at the U4 Club in Vienna in about December '83. And, for this gig, I learned all the drums perfectly. Everything Stuart and Robin had wanted me to produce in the studio.
And at this time, were you made aware of anyone questioning your ability after the gig?
No, as ever, I just gave a bang on performance. And, I've got the video of that gig to prove it.
And finally, our Soho tour brings us to Old Compton Street, where we find what was the Polo Bar, which was, and still is, a cafe restaurant. It's had a bit of a refit and been renamed La Porchetta Polo Bar, but it still has a similar feel to it. Now, Paul was just expecting to get some money for his band expenses. But instead, it's here we see the beginning of the end of Paul's involvement in Sade with Lee Barrett and a certain document. Or is it an invoice?
Yeah, I mean, I returned to London after Christmas, and I hadn't heard from the band. It was really odd because we used to share Christmas cards every Christmas, with that time of year. And so I rang up Sade's flat to see what was going on with the band, what we were going to be doing next. And Stuart answered the phone and he said, "Oh, have you spoke to Lee Barrett yet?" And I said, "Well, no, I haven't. I've just got back." He says, "Oh, well, can you just call him?" So I kind of put the phone down, called Lee, and he just said to me, "Well, I want a meeting. Can we meet up in this bar, the Polo Bar?" And I said, "Well, yeah, fine." Went down there, met him, and he just said, "Oh, well, Paul, I don't think want you as the drummer anymore. And with that, he started scribbling on this scrappy piece of paper, which looked like the back of a band flyer that he had, and handed it to me. And it just explained on it that, you know, I was going to receive £1,400. And he said, would you sign it? And I said, no. There was a bit of a red flag with me at that point. It wasn't very professional. So I didn't sign it, and gave me this cheque for £1,400 and said, thank you very much.
And to add in here, the cheque was actually for £1,370.61. And what did you think this document was that he wanted you to sign?
Well, I haven't got a clue. I mean, I thought it was a receipt, you know, for the sort of band's money that we were all entitled to. I didn't have a clue what he was doing with the document, and I didn't know why I had to sign it at the time. Usually, he just gave me money. We never had to sign anything. I mean, you know, for him to be scribbling away and then asking me to sign things and then handing me checks was all very odd. It was not commensurate with the previous, you know, band experiences of Lee having a briefcase full of cash.
Do you know whose idea it was to try and get you to sign this document?
No, I mean, I can only presume it was down to the solicitor, Brian Carr. You know, he was a director, we found out, of Sade's company at the time, but I'm not sure.
Well, why would he want you to sign this?
Well, I mean, I believe at the end of the day, they did want to present me as a session drummer. And, you know, obviously, as a session drummer, I would have invoiced Sade's company from when he's, you know, performing on the album.
And therefore no publishing royalties?
Exactly. And I told him I wasn't signing the invoice.
Was this before or after the release of the 12-inch single of Smooth Operator, on which you were listed as the drummer?
Yeah, I mean, I was listed as the drummer on the band, and this signing, this invoice situation was presented in January '84 when I was sacked, prior to the release of the epic 12-inch single, where I was listed as actually a drummer in the band, not a session drummer.
So you were registered as a member of the band at this point?
Yeah, that's correct. And then on the release of the album later in the year, my status changed. Again, was changed by Epic Records to a session drummer on the album. So in 1 year, I started as a fully fledged member of the band on the 12-inch single, registered as the original drummer on the band's first ever release, and then was demoted to a session player on the release of the Diamond Life album later in the year. And it got even more confusing because I was then asked back to perform on Your Love Is King on more than one occasion. And when I went into the Top of the Pops dressing room, I was listed as Sade was listed as 5 members of the band, including me. So I was back to being a fully fledged member of the band again on Top of the Pops, which I was in Manchester when we played the Peter Powell's Oxford Roadshow with Sade on Your Love Is King again. And finally I was demoted to actually nothing. After that last TV performance. So at least it clarified where I was. I was neither a session drummer or the original drummer. I was actually gone at that point.
In part 3, we catch up with Paul, who is now out of the band, and he finally works out what has happened, and court cases loom. Just a Drummer was written, edited, produced and presented by me, Douglas Pye. Music by Paul Cook, with Paul playing premier drums as used on Diamond Life. And sound mix by Guilt Free Studios. This was a Cook Pye production.